Greetings, diners, and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Cafe here on the Doomstead Diner. Today, I'm pleased to welcome my guest, Josh Ellis. Josh runs the blog zenarchery.com. He's a web developer and author, and is recently semi-famous around the blogosphere for having written a well-circulated blog, Everyone I Know Is Brokenhearted. And that seems to speak for many people these days. So I felt that I'd like to talk to Josh. I wasn't aware of his work before. One of the other diners found the blog on X-Ray Mike's website and then put a link to it on the diner. I went and read it, and it's a very affecting blog overall. So, Josh, welcome, and give us a little bit of the history of the blog and yourself, and how it all came to be.
Thanks. Well, I've been a professional writer for a long time. It was my first kind of job out of high school, in fact. I've been a newspaper columnist. I've written features for people. I'm also a web developer. And I've always been fascinated by technology. Obviously, it's what I do for a living, but also as kind of a futurist as well. But I've started to notice recently that a lot of people I know, as I said in my blog post, just really unhappy. It seems like the world outside is becoming increasingly difficult for them to deal with. And, you know, I've been dealing with, as I said in my blog post, I've been depressed a lot. Some of it's from relationship issues, but a lot of it is just from like feeling like the world feels kind of hopeless. And the other night, I just sat down on my porch outside my apartment, and I just started writing. And wrote this very long, rambling post that I really didn't expect more than I think I had at the time like 1,500 Twitter followers. I expected, you know, maybe a dozen of them to read it, and instead it seems to have gone strangely viral. There's been hundreds of thousands of unique visits to my site. I've been getting messages from people, pretty much every way people can send me messages: email, Facebook, Twitter, and it's just really kind of resonated, kind of to have struck a chord with people. This feeling that the world is just a scary, depressing place, and of course it always has been. But a lot of people, I think, feel hopeless now. They feel like there's no way to change the things that are driving a lot of us, frankly, crazy.
Well, you know, the way we see it on the diner is that you have a whole confluence of various things that are all basically connected to resource limits and the problems and the struggles that many countries are having now on an economic level is all tied back into the fact that the amount of energy that is necessary to run the industrial culture is diminishing in its availability. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to get, at increasingly higher costs, with an increasingly lower energy return on energy invested. All the peak oil sort of things are coming to fruition. There are peak oil deniers out there. There are still plenty of them all over the place, but pretty much all of the effects that one would expect of seeing energy diminish, the per capita energy, really, because you're talking about an increasing population pool globally. You're talking China, India, everybody who wants some of this remaining oil, and they all want to live the American dream, which, as George Carlin said, you have to be asleep to believe it. And so the struggle is on everywhere, and I think this unconsciously, I think this is affecting many people and their thought process and what they perceive as what their future might be, what their job possibilities might be, what type of work they might be able to do, and so forth. You spoke yourself of being something of a technophile, uh, kind of a Ray Kurzweil futurist type. Uh, my perception is that we're looking at the end of this type of stuff, that we're not going to see the internet and all the rest of that. And we're probably not going to see electric power in many places inside of a decade or so. At least that's my perception of it. So I think, if people feel this sort of stuff subconsciously, even if they don't, read all the stuff and get in the blogosphere, if they feel this, they see all the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, that it's going to be depressing, and you're not going to feel too great about it. It's not just a personal thing, it's the global zeitgeist that's affecting you.
Right. And I think you're certainly right about resources. The only thing I can say and counter is that I think that people clearly have begun to recognize this. Now, whether it's too late or not, that's going to be a difficult thing to understand until it happens. It's kind of an emergent thing. But what you said about the technology, something that I thought about was really fascinating. I read a couple of years ago that if you took the battery from a MacBook Air, which has a battery life of about 8 hours, something like that, and you were to put that in the first MacBook they ever came out with, which I think was probably about 91, 92, that battery would charge the original MacBook for about 15 seconds, and then it would die. The technology now is obviously vastly more powerful, but it's also vastly more efficient. Something that I've been completely in love with. Right now, I'm talking to you on a Chromebook. Now, I'm a Mac guy. I have been for years. I love Macs. But I got this Chromebook as something that I could just kind of throw in a bag and carry around. And it's actually replaced my MacBook Pro as my primary computer. I haven't turned my MacBook on more than once in about 3 weeks. And part of the reason for that is that this Chromebook will run on one battery charge for about 8 or 9 hours. And that's complete full usage. That's sitting there for 8 hours working. I'm beginning to see a lot of hope in renewable energy in ways that I really haven't before. I'm very cynical about renewable energy because, as you probably know, every year some scientific team trumpets that they figured out a way to make solar power that comes off of paint. And you can just paint your house with solar cells. And that's great. And every year for decades, there's this big announcement, and it still isn't at Home Depot. You still can't buy solar paint. It's announcing it, and it just keeps staying in the laboratory, which has always been depressing to me. But now, in a lot of places, we're starting to see the point where, due to things like we talked about, like the increasing expense of fossil fuels, wind power and solar power are beginning to be the cheaper alternative. And part of what I'm a technophile, but I'm not one of those people who believes that technology can solve everything. But I do believe that there are some of these problems which are engineering problems that can be solved simply by being more efficient and having more efficient use of resources. For the last 100 years, we've been running around like Charlie Sheen at a stripper party as a civilization. We just burned through oil, we burned through power, we burned through everything because we didn't have to worry about it. It was the stuff that came out of the wall or came out of the tap or what have you. And now we're confronted with the fact that we can't act like, frankly, pardon my language, but we can't be these assholes anymore. We have to be more considerate, more efficient. We have to actually think about what we're doing. And there are people who seem to be stepping up to the plate. Last year, I'm researching a book. I'm working on a book right now about technology in East Africa. And I went to Kenya and Uganda, which is an absolutely fascinating technology culture there because it's totally different from the kind of Silicon Valley douchebag program where let's make an app to help you get your laundry delivered to you because you're too lazy to get it yourself. It's a totally different vibe. But one of the things that was really fascinating is that in East Africa, they use these stoves that are called jiko. And you pretty much see them everywhere in the developing world under different names. It's the cooking pot that everybody uses.
Sounds a little like a rocket stove.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a little Dutch oven kind of vibe, that exactly. Camp stove, but a slightly bigger version. And they've now started figuring out ways to retrofit GECOs to use the thermal energy to generate power. So you can, charge your cell phone. Cell phones are absolutely fascinating technology in this sense because they are incredibly more efficient. You think about how much power your cell phone uses versus what a desktop computer uses, it's like orders of magnitude. And as people have moved away from desktop computing towards that, or even desktop phones, that's a really nice reduction of power usage.
Well, just to talk about that a little bit in more detail, seeing as how you're somebody who knows something about this stuff, I see where the individual laptops and the what do you call it, cell phones, etc. The personal devices obviously have become far more efficient in their use of power, and they run on batteries for hours and hours and hours and so forth. But the infrastructure itself of the internet, all the routers and all the rest of that, I've read at times that it's up to 10% of the electrical power usage in the United States goes to running the infrastructure of the internet. So, is this really efficient, and where does that infrastructure go as the cost of electricity becomes higher and consumers can't pay for it and so forth? Where do you see that going?
Well, one of the things that you're beginning to see are these much more decentralized systems for these things. Are you familiar with the concept of mesh networking?
Maybe, I'm not sure I know it by that name, but distributed networks and sort of that sort of thing. I have some idea that, and peer-to-peer networks where you go one computer to another and so forth. And so forth.
Precisely. So there are people right now who are working on retrofitting Android phones, for example, to be able to make phone calls directly from phone to phone using basically any phones that are within transceiver distance. As a sort of a mesh-based network as opposed to a hub network where all of the phones are connected to one central tower. They're all connecting to one another. And if one of them is connected to the outside internet, then they all are. And so, again, that's another example of how that's starting to change. I know that some of the large server farms like Amazon are, Google, for example. And let me preface this by saying that I am not a fan of these large corporations for a lot of reasons. But credit where credit's due. They are, in many cases, trying to move their server systems entirely to wind or solar power. And back in the day, if you had an internet server, it was a beast. It was a giant behemoth of a machine that I remember, my old desktop computer could raise the temperature in my living room by 20 degrees simply because it was so heat inefficient. But now, with some of the blade servers they have, these things are not using much more electricity than a laptop. The only problem with them is that they're always connected. They're always on. But if you're moving that sort of thing towards being run on renewable energy, I think it's better. And I absolutely agree with you. I think that every part of our infrastructure is at some point. Electrical grid is, I don't think most people really understand how primitive our electrical grid in America actually is. Even after things like those blackouts in New York in, what was that, 03, 04, people don't realize how fragile our systems are.
Not just fragile, but antiquated as well.
Exactly.
A lot of this stuff has not been upgraded or updated in decades. Many of the larger transformers and so forth are no longer even made in the United States. They're only made in China and places. And if you have trade breakdowns with China, if the globalist system of trade breaks down, and that can happen in conjunction with a breakdown of the financial system, then you can't get the replacement parts for this old stuff, and piece by piece, the the system begins to break down.
Right.
And the question becomes, where do you find the money to rebuild the systems when basically everybody is broke? Basically, the country is in trillions of dollars in debt, and where does it come from? What's the underlying basis for that money? And so it all ties together, and the money is basically, in my opinion, is a proxy for energy, and uh, creating more credit in the absence of additional energy is a pointless exercise. It won't buy anything. The stuff won't be there to buy.
Sure.
So
The other thing I would suggest, which is kind of connected to what Ari was saying, is when you deal with a lot of technological advanced equipment, the thing to bear in mind is the embedded costs, not just in the infrastructure, but also in developing the technology in the first place. For example, the process of constructing a microchip is very energy intensive. And I think this is a distinction that people need to remember, because there's high energy consumption, but then there's also energy intensity. And this is where things like fossil fuels are very useful, because this is what is needed to make microchips. Because, for example, per unit weight, a computer, I think from the 90s, is 20 times more fuel intensive, energy intensive, than building a car. That's per unit weight, like per kilo. And the microchip is something like 2 magnitudes greater, like 100 times. So you have to think about it, because it's all to do with the second law of thermodynamics, where, yeah. So basically, as you make the structure more ordered, it takes more energy. You're going up an energy curve. So when you're dealing with nanochips, the amount of entropy, like, it's very low, because it's very ordered and it's very energy intensive. And that's one problem with the energy side of things. The other problem is you use rare earth materials, and that's a significant problem in a lot of new technologies. And that are two fundamental barriers that I see with high-tech
well,
technology.
and the other aspect there as well is that the it's not just the construction of the computer and the energy cost that it takes to make the microchips and so forth and so on. This aspect of our current society, it's just a communications aspect that we're talking about here. But in order to maintain the miles and miles of electrical cable and all the rest of that, and to move the computers around from Amazon.com to your house, takes a transportation system. And renewable energy, for the most part, wind power and solar power, can't run uh, automobiles and can't run trucks and can't fly jet planes and all the rest of that stuff. When you're talking about the infrastructure main, that we use to maintain this system that we live in, uh, you're only talking a part of it when you're talking the electrical system and the communication system. The transportation system is under all of that, or is part of all of that. One example I give is here up here in Alaska, we've got this system of roads and so forth, and we all try to move around on them every day. And then in the wintertime, we get these big snowfalls, right? And so what do? We send out more big machines to push the snow off the road so that we can keep driving on the roads. And the amount of energy that gets wasted in this process of pushing around essentially water that is falling from the sky on a regular basis so that we can all just move around on a regular basis every day. But in order to maintain the systems, you have to do that, because otherwise the snowfalls and so forth take down power lines and so forth. The guys in the trucks got to get out to those lines. If the roads aren't clear to do that, you're going to be without power through the whole winter. Right. So these integrated aspects of our society are sometimes overlooked. I think we talked with David Korowitz about this stuff, and it's it's a complex system that has many failure points possible. Any one of those failure points can essentially make the whole grind the whole system to a halt. You don't know which one it's going to be that's really going to be the first major failure, but when you take them all in aggregate, one of them's going to fail. Which kind of brings me to another topic that we discussed briefly before we got on air, which is the fact that you recently moved out of Las Vegas, where you spent quite a number of years, and was in reading your blog was a decent part of the unhappiness that you were feeling when you wrote that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your time in Vegas and what you see about that community that was really impacting on your state of mind?
Well, I moved to Las Vegas Christmas of '98. My parents lived there. I was living in Los Angeles, trying to do the .com thing, writer, or whatever. And my idea was that I would go to Las Vegas for 6 months, maybe get a job in the casino, make a little bit of money, and then go back to Los Angeles and try again to succeed there. And that was 15 years, so that didn't really work out. I was a columnist for the Las Vegas City Life, which was the alternative weeklies in the city. Vegas is a very interesting place. In terms of sustainability, it's a no-go. It's the most unsustainable city in the world. Maybe Dubai is, but there is no way. Las Vegas is an entirely artificial city. It's a city that absolutely relies upon large-scale supply chains. It could not exist without them, and it's a very depressing city. It has an enormously high suicide rate. Most people who know Vegas know it as tourists. They come here and they gamble and they do whatever. Outside of the Strip, outside of the tourism economy, Las Vegas is just another southwestern city. But it's an industry town in the same way that Detroit was. In the industry, in this case, being tourism, hospitality, all of that. And the ancillary industry, which is construction, of course, because it takes a lot of people to build casinos. And it was fascinating to live in Las Vegas for the time that I did, because the city was one of the fastest growing cities on earth. When I moved there in '98, there were less than 1 million people. When I left, the population dropped during the recession, but it was still pretty close to 2 million, if not back over it. So you're talking about a city that doubled in size in 10 years, which was absolutely fascinating to watch. But the problem is that it's a city that is... Vegas is the capitalist id of America. It is capitalism. It is the center and the heart of that. And it's a very hard place to live about if you don't actually just care about money. Vegas is a city that has always been entirely about money and very little else. The way that the city and the county treat the poor is barbaric. And I'm absolutely happy to use that word. Their health and human services budget is a joke. There's almost no support for the mentally ill. The former mayor, who was a mob lawyer, who played himself in the movie Casino, that was very classic, Oscar Goodman, made it illegal to give food to the homeless in Las Vegas, on the grounds that it encouraged them. Because God knows if I'm sleeping rough on the streets, I'm not going to want to get out of it if a guy gives me a burger. Apparently, that's how that works. And it's a rough town. It's a mean town. And the trade-off for that is that some of the most amazing people I've ever known are there, and some of the most brilliant and committed people. The people who work for community in Las Vegas are fighting an uphill battle. And the ones who stay there and make it work deserve nothing but respect, because they are salmon going upstream. Because the powers that be and the financial and political powers in the city don't care about community. They don't. And I don't think anybody who lived there would really disagree with me on that, except that they had a best financial interest in opportunity. But I just...
On the good side, the people who run it won't be running it for too much longer if the water situation doesn't improve substantially in the near future.
And that's another really fascinating thing about Las Vegas. Las Vegas is a gatekeeper in a much larger way than most people realize. Lake Mead, which is right outside of Las Vegas, where the Hoover Dam is, where I want to say something like 90% of Los Angeles County, of really all of Southern California's water comes from, Arizona as well, and of course Nevada. The Hoover Dam, the water portion, is controlled by the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which is part of the Las Vegas Clark County Water District. They're entangled basically, and they control the water. And Los Angeles is in many ways as artificial as Las Vegas is. If you've ever seen any of the sketches or woodcuts of Los Angeles in the 19th century, it was desert. It was not what it is now. It was terraformed, almost as thoroughly as you would have to do if you went to another planet to try and build an environment, by people like Walter Mulholland. And Chinatown is about that, right? The water in Los Angeles is a huge, huge deal. Very little of that water actually comes into Nevada at all, and Las Vegas. Up until the 60s, Las Vegas' primary water source was the groundwater, but that was drained. And in fact, their entire neighborhood in North Las Vegas that literally fell into the ground because the groundwater had been drained out, and they had to relocate to live there. I did a story about that years ago. But the statistic I've heard, just to give you an example of the unsustainability of it, is you're familiar with the Bellagio, big casino, with the lake out front with the fountain, Andrea Bocelli's, Bong's playing. So Lake Bellagio, during the summertime, the statistic that I was told, evaporates 20,000 gallons of water every hour, which is astonishing. And again, if you care about sustainability, it's almost unimaginable. Just the balls of that. Just wow, that's incredible that you would actually do that and not think of the consequence. The entire American West is going to be having some very, very serious problems with water shortages. There's a marvelous book called Cadillac Desert, and I forget the name of the author at the moment, but it's easy to find. It talks about the water rights and water use in the West, and this was never, ever sustainable. There was never a point when the water was not going to run out. Even going back to the days of settlement, you look at the Native American tribes who lived in most of the big basin between the Rockies and the San Bernardino Mountains, the West, California. They were subsistence. They didn't farm. They were essentially hunter-gatherers. They had no way of surviving, and they were basically barely survived at all. And that's going back when you had maybe a few thousand people living out west. Now that you have hundreds of millions, and you're doing the kind of massive industrial farming that's done in the San Joaquin Valley, of course, but even places like where I live now in Yakima in central Washington, you're talking about it all goes back, as you said, to logistics, to supply chain, to industrial farming, for example, where you're talking about not subsistence farming, not regional local farming. 80% of the hops that's used in America in beer and other things comes from this valley. And so imagine how much water you're using to provide America with the hops that makes up America's beer. And that's one vertical in terms of farming.
Well, I did just parenthetically, I did see a article on Zero Hedge recently talking about the problems that the local beer brewers in California were having now with water restrictions and so forth. To make the beer takes a tremendous amount of water, just much more than the volume of one can of beer. I think it's something like 8 cans of water for 1 can of beer, or something along those lines. So the between the cost of the water and the restrictions on the water and so forth, many of these beer producers are essentially on the verge of going out of business. And to me, when I thought about it and my perspectives of collapse and when is collapse coming to the United States and so forth, I said, well, collapse is here when the beer runs out.
Well, I wrote a post years ago on a private message board run by a comic book writer named Warren Ellis that used to run. There were just a few of us on there, and I wrote this post on there, and a couple of the people who were on there, including a guy named Jamie Zawinski, who was a well-known programmer, reposted it, and it was a post just that came to be called "The Grim Meat Hook Future." And my argument, the thing that I suspect will happen, I don't believe in the Mad Max apocalypse, in the breakdown, the sort of very big, very flashy breakdown of Western civilization. What I suspect is more likely is something that's, frankly, a hell of a lot more depressing, which is that everything's just going to run down like a beat-up old watch. It's just going to get shittier, man. It's just going to get harder, and things are going to be more expensive, and all of the things that we've taken for granted are just going to run out one by one very slowly. And that's, in some ways, that's worse. I know a lot of people, and I frankly feel like I'm one of them. As I said in my blog post, I know people who long for the Mad Max apocalypse because a lot of us feel like we'd be a hell of a lot better at dealing with that than we are with this consumer capitalist society that we live in. We'd be better out in the desert, fighting for the last can of gas than trying to find a job in an environment that's increasingly hostile to workers, trying to make a life for ourselves within the constructs of what we have now. And the thing is, we are so addicted to the way things are right now as a species, not even as Americans, but we're addicted to having what we want when we want it, and we've done a lot of work to make that happen. And I don't think that it's simply going to go away that quickly because we have so much invested in it. We are going to fight for every last dollar, every last piece of resource. We're going to push this as far as we can. And it's just going to start to suck. It's going to start to suck a lot. You're going to begin seeing the vast migrations of people out of the West the way that you did during the Dust Bowl. And so then you're going to have to deal with the ramifications of that. If Las Vegas dries up, what people don't realize is that's a city that has the lowest number of PhDs of any city in America. Las Vegas, by and large, is not a center for intellectual prowess. And a lot of people come there because they can get jobs as cocktail waitresses, as blackjack dealers, whatever, without the benefits of a lot of education. Now, I don't mean to sound horrible or elitist about that, but it's just a fact. It's a town for working class people. Well, what happens when that city dries up and those people leave? Where do they go? They're not going to Phoenix because Phoenix is going to dry up the same way. We're going to see a mass migration of those people, and we're going to have to deal with where they end up. And that's just one example of one ramification of this problem. A lot of people.
Well, it's pretty hard to imagine how the society is going to handle mass migrations when you're talking about, you're talking about big cities here, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and then you mentioned, of course, Los Angeles, and a whole lot more sustainable than either one of those. And where do you resettle all those people, You look at what happened to the Okies when they moved out to California. They essentially were dying en masse on the grapes of wrath. John Steinbeck wrote all about that.
Right.
People don't realize how many people really bought the farm essentially during the worst years of the Great Depression.
Sure. And those people were frankly, they were dirty ass dirt farmers. We're talking about Los Angeles, Phoenix, all those places. You're not just talking about migrants. You're talking about the white collar. You're talking about big industry, right? So Las Vegas is trying to build a technology industry there, which is a whole other set of issues, frankly. But what happens when those people are suddenly displaced? Those people have money. What happens when Steven Spielberg can't live in Hollywood anymore, Beverly Hills, because Beverly Hills cannot be sustained? These are big, scary questions that we don't want to ask ourselves. And the drama of the idea of everything just going full on bad, you know, the Twaki, right? The end of the world as we know it. But the world doesn't want to end that quickly, and people are going to fight for this stuff, and it's going to get just sad. It's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be just to watch things fall apart and the center stop holding. That's going to be agonizing for the rest of the century. And I think, again, that's one of the things that really depresses people right now that my article kind of spoke to, my piece, was that all of this is just really, really depressing. And it doesn't even have the benefit of being exciting. You know, it's, oh, cool, now I get to make shoulder pads out of old tractor tires, and I can carry a shotgun and live and be badass. It's not that, man. That would be better than just going, okay, well, I guess that my town is just not going to exist anymore, and now I have to go and find something else to do, and my family have been farmers for 5 generations, so where am I going to go? Am I going to go to New York? Am I going to go to Detroit? Oh, but there's no jobs there because the corporations are trying to minimize the amount of money they have to put into paying their workers so they can maximize profits. You know, you hear this thing all the time from people in the tech industry, and it's absolutely infuriating, where they say, well, yes, we're disrupting all of these industries, you know, and manufacturing things, but those people can just learn to fix robots. It's like, man, you ever met a 50-year-old migrant worker? You can tell that dude he's going to fix robots now? It's not the way the world works. It just sucks, man. And it's just, I don't know how to think about this. And I think a lot of people don't know how to think about it and how to deal with it, because it seems so futile, because everything that we want to do, you can say either, well, that's not good business, or milk him if you got him, Johnny, because we're all fucked.
I think when it comes to predicting future events, it's notoriously difficult. But the thing I think that's kind of helpful is to look at countries that are experiencing difficulties. And I think a good indicator or leading indicator for what America might experience in the future is places like Ukraine or the Middle East, because a lot of the problems they face is fundamentally similar, that there's not enough jobs, not enough income, and not enough resources, and it just turns into a political debate because people's livelihoods are at stake. For Joe Sixpack, it's his job. For the people higher up, they'll lose their grip on power. Like you mentioned, you know, people like Steven Spielberg, if he can't live in Los Angeles, or the people running Los Angeles, they lose their positions. What are they going to do? Are they going to just accept their fate, or are they going to fight? And it might not be a physical fight, but it could be political, although I could see violence happening as well.
Because
and this is
spiral into physical.
Yeah, but generally speaking, I can see what's happening in other countries happening to the United States. Just look at Greece, look at Ukraine, and just imagine similar things happening in the next 5 to 10 years.
I had a brief chat with Steve over on Economic Undertow on his recent blog regarding, Steve's saying, how do we know when collapse, or, the job of us bloggers is to predict when the collapse is going to come, because that's what all our readers want to know, okay, when's it coming? Is it going to be tomorrow? And so Steve's, basic deal was, well, the collapse is already here. It's currently ongoing, and people just aren't recognizing it, if you will. And my response to that was basically, well, yeah, I agree with you. We're watching a slow motion train wreck here, but what people want to know is, when are the gas pumps at 7-Eleven going to run out of gas, and when is the ATM machine not going to work when I stick my little card in and try to get some Federal Reserve notes out, et cetera, et cetera. These big watershed moments that you think of. Yeah,
that's the thing. The watershed moments are only ever recognizable in retrospect. You look at the end of the Roman Empire, And and everybody talks about the barbarian storm, but Rome was done long before that. Rome was basically, as a civilization, started to end when Constantine moved the base of power from Rome to Byzantium. And it's funny, people don't realize this. The Byzantines, for a long time, called themselves Romans. They were the Eastern Roman Empire. That's what they defined themselves as. For them, Rome never ended, but in retrospect, we can see where it did. And what's going to happen is it's not going to be the one day all the gas stops working. That's so unlikely based on the way that we have built our society. What's going to happen is one day the gas won't work, but they'll be on again tomorrow, and you'll go, oh, okay, well, that's cool. And then maybe another month later it'll be off, and maybe it'll be off for 2 days. But that's cool. We'll get it back on. It'll be fine. By the time it's gone for good, nobody's asking that question because everybody will just know that it's done. It'll happen slowly, and it'll happen slowly, and then all at once, as everybody says. The problem with predicting the future is that the future doesn't look anything the way that we anticipate it to. If you would ask these questions in 1960, the question you'd be asking is, when is the bank going to stop cashing my checks? But we don't use checks anymore. We use cards. Do you know what I mean? So it's gonna, when it finally goes, it's going to go in ways that we can't even anticipate, particularly because the rate of change in our society is going to happen very, very fast now to deal with these issues. So the change is going to be coming at us in such great strides because everybody's going to be trying to figure out ways to get around what seems inevitable. And when it finally gets there, it's not going to be anything that you and I can anticipate. And that's why I don't think the idea of just one big kind of collapse, it is a collapse, but it's less of a collapse and more like a beautiful mansion that's just falling into disrepair. It doesn't happen over a day or a month or a year, maybe even 10 years. It happens over 50 years. And if you watch it slowly, you can see it happen every day, but you'll never see it happening in front of your eyes.
Well, the reason I brought this up, or in terms of when you can see it or when it's actually there, is the reference we made to the violence currently ongoing in Ukraine and the Middle East. My question to Steve was, well, when does the FSA, Fascist States of America, look like Syria? When is there factional violence between different people? People from Phoenix, migrating outward, and other people saying, "Hey, we don't want you guys here. You dirtbags from Phoenix," and then the guns start to come out and all the rest of that. We have plenty of those guns here in the FSA, etc. So when do we see the violence? Is a question.
We're starting to see it already. We're just not recognizing it as that because it's not people from Phoenix, it's people from Mexico. But you look at the way the rhetoric that is around the anti-illegal immigration people, the people who want to put these children in camps, people like that asshole Arpaio or however you pronounce it down in Arizona, that sheriff who puts illegal immigrants who are arrested into tent cities and makes them wear pink underwear and puts them in places where it's so hot that they just die. And of course, they're not us, they're not Americans, but the reality is that in a globalist society, that's not as simple as it ever seemed to be. And we are so afraid of them taking our jobs and our resources. Something which I've always found amusing because, God knows I wanted to go out and pick grapes for under minimum wage until some poor Mexican dude took that job from me, which is nonsense. Those people do the jobs that Americans don't want to do. And there's a symbiosis there that's very interesting because most of those same people who are complaining that Mexicans are coming up here and taking our resources are people whose entire economies could not survive without them. Without illegal immigration, there's no Southwest in America. But you are seeing the beginnings of that. And again, it's just not as clear-cut and as dramatic as people from Phoenix, but it will start to become that way. We'll start to externalize people who were once internalized. When the Southwest goes, people in the Northwest, people in the East are going to start seeing it as those people. And, and of course there's the big secret about America is that those people have already been here. You look at the news and what's been happening in St. Louis with that kid, Michael Brown, who was shot by the policeman, unarmed, 18-year-old kid last night. And those internal struggles are already here, and they're getting worse. Particularly in the fact that we seem to really just shoot a lot of unarmed young black men right now in America. But we can pass it off, and that's what I'm talking about. It's like, the old thing of you put a frog in a pot and set it on to boil. The frog will never jump out of the pot because he's never going to reach the point where he realizes he's boiling. And I think that's a very apt metaphor for America. We don't see how violent things are. We don't see how I'm trying to think of the right word here, how separated we are, how divisive we have become. I don't think that that's something that's really obvious to us because we're in the middle of it. It's obvious to other countries, and other people recognize that. But I don't know that we're ever going to see it until seeing it is no longer a bulwark against having it happen. We're not going to prevent it. You're still muted.
Got it. Doing the engineering while you're listening and thinking that sometimes is a problem. But I've been doing pretty good today overall. And I do try to mute because sitting in the cafe here, sometimes they turn on the cappuccino machine and all the rest of that, so it's a little noisy, But I like the ambiance, and it makes the cafe look like a cafe.
I like the color of the wall. I like that paint. That's an excellent choice. That yellow is really nice.
Oh yeah, this place is really quite nice. You see all these pictures that are on the wall here are by either local photographers, local artists, and so forth. And they change every week or 2 weeks or so, and have a new bunch of stuff up. And so most of the stuff's for sale, and keeps the local economy going. Very nice. But anyway, now I lost track of my thought. Where were we?
The shit hitting the fan so slowly you don't realize that.
Oh, you should, yeah, boiling frog effect, yeah. I wonder about that, and we talk about that periodically on the diner. We talk about slow collapse versus fast collapse, and how quickly it all might go down over time. And aspects of it, I can agree with both perspectives. I tend to feel that at some point there's major cogs that are going to give way, and when those major cogs give way, you'll see, it's a kind of stepwise deal where all of a sudden, boom, you drop down to another plateau for a little while and so forth, and maybe you climb a little back up and then boom, down again. So, as a punctuated collapse, maybe you want to call it, or something along those lines. But you talk about the way everybody's expectations are that things are just going to suck, and they're going to get suckier day by day and week by week. And how do different people handle this in different ways? One of the blogs that we follow and often have a lot of conversation about is Guy McPherson's Nature Bats Last blog. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Guy's a PhD biologist and climatologist, or at least he has compiled a lot of climatic evidence by other climate scientists that basically, to him, proves that we are facing a near-term human extinction on the order of that by 2050, every last human being on the face of the earth is going to be dead. I tend to be in what I call the bottleneck camp. I see this as a very large-scale die-off of human population on the order of 90% or possibly more, but that we won't see an extinction level event by 2050. That seems to make way too rapid a timeline for such a thing to happen. But, when you go and you read the commenters on Nature Bats Last, the people who follow that blog and follow the line of thought that what we are facing down here is an extinction of humanity and, in fact, most of the vertebrate species on Earth in the very short order. is there's a sense of utter hopelessness among them, and in fact, Guy himself denies that hope is even a good thing to have in this situation. That anybody who has hope is fooling themselves, and they can't face reality, and so forth. And I wonder about what the value of that mindset is to be so utterly helpless and hopeless that nothing can be done. That is there nothing you can do to make your life better, to change? If you can't change society as a whole, can you change yourself or your community in some way? Can you create transition type towns? Can you build anything that will uh, make life better, if not for the world as a whole, at least for a small community of people? Are changes possible at all, or are we on a runaway train that we just can't get off of, and you're basically screwed no matter what? How do you look at that?
Well, I'll tell you, the way I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been having a lot of people emailing me and reaching out to me, as I'd said, and telling me that the thing that I wrote made them feel like there might be hope, and it made them feel less alone, made them feel like they weren't crazy for feeling like this. And my answer is that I don't know whether or not there's any hope for humanity. I have no idea. I have no idea if the guy you're talking about is correct, if we're just fucked and there's nothing we can do about it. But whether that's true or not, I will never, ever go down without a fight. I will fight as a human, as a member of the human species, as a man, as whatever, until I don't have any energy left, until every possible solution has been tried and discarded. That's why humans are a remarkable species. We are one of the very few species that almost never simply accepts our fate. And we have put ourselves in a very bad position. We put the entire planet in a very bad position through an incredible amount of thoughtlessness. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I will be damned if I'm just going to put a gun in my mouth at this point. Because the one thing that I believe is that you should never give up hope to the last breath, no matter what. You can always try to find a way. And if it's inevitable, it's inevitable. Fuck it. But if you just assume that it's inevitable and you say there's no hope, we're all going to die, then you lose the chance to even find any possibility, any solution. And that's unacceptable to me.
I'm pretty much in that camp myself, and I often get in some pretty serious arguments on Nature Bats Last. I'm a regular commenter on other people's blogs besides running my own and writing my own blogs and so forth. Make a nuisance of myself wherever I go. But the way I phrase that is, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And you gotta, if you're gonna have meaning to your life, then you've gotta hold on to some hope, and you gotta keep trying. And even if the odds are against you, even if maybe it doesn't have any chance of success at all, that the effort is what is important and is what keeps you going. If you don't hold on to something, then why bother? Like you say, put a gun in your mouth and just blow your brains out of it.
The other argument is that if this is really true, if we're not going to make it out of this, then you know what? Let's stop working. Let's stop paying for things. Let's stop striving to do all this bullshit that we think is important. If somebody can prove to me that the world is coming to an end, if somebody can prove that conclusively, let's all just get naked and get stoned until the fucking waves come, man. I mean, really, those are your two options as far as I can tell. But you never just turn over and show your belly,
There's nothing to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah. So orgies until until the bombs fall sounds like a pretty good idea to me. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a better alternative than just sitting here being.
Well, and sometimes they make the case over there and say, well, one last party or one big party before you go. Well, isn't that what we're doing? Having one big last party here, blowing off all as much energy as we possibly can, and living this ridiculously consumptive lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that the big party? In a sense, that's true. At least as far as the people who are in this culture is concerned. People who are in other cultures and other places of the earth aren't having a party anymore. They're in the business of shooting each other right now. But anyway, I think this is a good place to tie up our conversation for the day. And I just want to give a chance to Monster to maybe make a few closing remarks, and then you two, Josh, and and then I hope to be able to talk again too as well, because this was a very, very good conversation, very enlightening conversation in many ways. Monster, you want to give us a few thoughts?
Well, it's just highlights the fact that everybody has like different opinions, and it's the main thing I see is there's several aspects, namely the speed of collapse, that is one of the high debating points, and it will be interesting to see how things will go and whether things like technology do play a part in ameliorating some of the problems. And yeah, I just see it as interesting times, as they say, and it's very difficult to see how things will pan out in the next 5 to 10 years, never mind 20. So I just think anyone who's too sure doesn't really know what they're talking about. So that's the main thing I would always say in these kinds of debates.
Agreed.
Yep, and definitely agreed there from me as well. Okay, Josh, you want to just close it up for yourself and leave your readers and fans with some final thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say was that your audience might be interested in checking out the work of John Robb. That's Robb with two B's, who's been talking a lot about resilience. Some of these things are things that a lot of people in the sort of collapse or even the prepper community will be familiar with, but he has some very interesting ideas about how we can make our community resilient that I think are probably worth paying attention to. And other than that, I would simply say that I believe that it's hard right now, and I know that it's always been hard. No generation ever was just like, hey, it's great, it's going to be great forever, this is awesome, I'm happy. But it does seem particularly difficult right now. It seems like we're in a much worse position for a very long time as a society. But I do believe that there can be hope, and I believe that it's worth it to try and find it. And that's the most important thing we can do right now as a species, is to simply find hope that we're going to have a future and it's going to be so I say go out and find it.
And I am 100% with you on that one. And in that vein, I'd like to remind everybody that we have our Sustaining Universal Needs Foundation, which you'll find at sunforliving.com. And our effort there is to try to bring together people, bring together communities using the power of the internet while we still have it to create a new type of more sustainable living situation for ourselves, something that perhaps can help us to negotiate what appear to be very tough times ahead in many ways. Energy-wise, climatologically, you name it, there's a problem out there that faces us down that we have to work on together, because individual preppers, little survivalists in holes, are not going to survive very long. The only people who are going to make it are the people who work together and develop community and find a way to become a better human being and a better steward of the planet, if it is still possible to become so. And with those thoughts, that's all the Dune, this time until next time, here on the Doomstead Diner. See you later, folks.